Today's project is a 1997 Kawasaki ZX7R. I acquired the bike through a coworker who told me his girlfriend had a motorcycle that had been in her garage for 10 years and she would like it gone. She said it was a Kawasaki but didn't know the model or year, but it had a clear title. She sent these pictures, and with that, the deal was done. With the pictures in hand, I began an internet search of trying to figure out what I had. It appeared that this graphic scheme was unique to 1997. In this era, there were a number of variations of this green and purple color combination. I liked the fact that the tank had the white stripe and that the fairing carried the white and the purple across the entire bike. Other combinations that I found were more solid green in nature. I also liked the white on the front of the fairing around the headlight assembly. Wheels of this era came in green, gray, and purple. The purple was the most obnoxious in my opinion, and was right at home with this overall scheme. I needed to wait until I had the bike in hand to give a thorough assessment to see what level of attention to detail I wanted to have in the final product. Something between OEM purity and Resto Mod Runner. I would decide that when I had the bike in my possession. I didn't know what to expect when I picked the bike up. What I found was a machine laying on its side for untold years with random stuff piled on top of it. The front tires were flat, and the front brake rotors and calipers were locked up. This made getting the bike onto the trailer a bit tricky. There was also a pool of oil present, which honestly didn't raise any major red flags at this phase of the game given the overall situation. I had a loose idea about what I wanted to spend on the bike to get it up to speed. I knew it was going to need a full set of bearings, front, rear wheel and neck, fork rebuild, full engine service, carburetor rebuild and gas tank refurbishment, front and rear brakes, and a new set of tires. Beyond that, with a little bit of elbow grease and some cosmetic improvement, I was hoping to have a running bike on the cheap and give myself a fun winter project. When I got the bike home, I pulled the fairings off and quickly discovered the source of the oil on the garage floor back at the donor residence. Surprise, surprise. In what I imagine was an epic moment for the previous owner, the connecting rod for one of the cylinders had failed catastrophically, resulting in hand grenade-style damage to the engine case and internals. My free bike project just got more complex and expensive. General teardown began with tank removal, lots of photos, and cataloging of hardware in well-marked bags. In a project like this, the teardown is kind of like a getting-to-know-you phase of a relationship. You learn the nuance of how the bike is designed and what makes it tick. One of the unique features of bikes from this era is the ram air induction. Air enters the front of the fairing through these two inlets, travels through these ducts, through the frame rail, and finally into this giant airbox. Once inside the airbox, the air passes through the air filter and travels down this sealed area where it is force-fed into the carburetors. The system is designed to get more air into the engine when running at speed. This approach to force-feeding air into the carburetors makes the setup a bit different than traditional UJM bikes. The venting of the float bowl must be in the pressurized area, otherwise fuel feed issues will occur as speed increases and the pressure changes inside the system. Besides the blown engine, the rest of the bike was filthy, but looked fairly sound. Moving to the subframe, I noticed that the previous owner had installed undertail lighting. I'm not a fan of that, so that was first to go. There was also some wiring shenanigans on what I assume was a tail tidy kit that integrated the turn signals into the rear tail stoplight. I decided all that had to go, and I would start over with something closer to the OEM wiring harness layout. The brake fluid inside the rear reservoir was coagulated into jelly. All of the lock mechanism for taking the seat off was intact and worked with the common key for the ignition. The chain was rusted and stiff, and the rear sprocket was missing 2 teeth. I researched OEM sprocket sizes and gear ratios and decided to go with a +2 teeth on the rear sprocket. This would impact top speed a bit, but would give the bike a little more responsiveness in the low and mid-range. I contemplated going down a tooth on the front sprocket, but decided to stay with the OEM number of teeth. I planned on sizing the chain for the largest sprocket combination, and if I went down a tooth on the front in the future, then I was sure that the chain would be long enough. The 4-into-1 pipe was a micron. These were popular pipes back in the day. The hanger was broken, the pipe was rusty and tarnished, and the packing was soaked with goop. Other than a few bent fins from running at super squid speeds, the radiator was in good shape, and coolant system appeared to be leak-free. Another nuance to this motorcycle is the electrical charging system. It doesn't use a stator like many other motorcycles of the era. It uses an automotive-style alternator driven by a chain that is separate from the engine assembly. Removing the swing arm would take a special tool to remove this bolt. The electrical system and wire harness was minimal on this bike. I documented routing of the main umbilical to the instrument cluster. The overflow tank for the cooling system had a broken tab, but I was hopeful that I could repair that so that it wouldn't leak too bad. Under the airbox, there was some emissions hardware. I researched what all this was about and contemplated removing all of it. Aftermarket vendors carry block-off plates where the valve cover vents are. This modification also requires the carburetor float bowl vent lines to be routed to the pressurized area of the airbox and will most likely require a rejet of the carburetors. I decided to move forward with the OEM configuration until I got the bike up and running, at which time I would evaluate future changes. Wiring and accessories on a bike of this genre is minimal. There's not even a fuel gauge. I removed the coils and bench tested them, and they appeared serviceable. There were a few things that made me scratch my head during the teardown. One of these things was the way the alternator was spliced into the main wiring harness with household-grade wire screws. As a heat shrink, solder, and bullet connector kind of a guy, this kind of drove me crazy when I saw it. The rest of the teardown was grimy but fairly uneventful. After a few hours, all that remained of the bike was the frame and swing arm assembly. When I picked up the bike, I was kind of surprised to see the polished frame, swing arm, and wheels. I contemplated whether to powder coat the frame back to its OEM silver prior to reassembly, but decided against it. I was never going to make this a concourse-grade restoration, so I felt that letting the bike lead me. And things like this made sense. One thing I was sure I wanted to change was the wheels. This bike needed those purple wheels. Bye-bye chrome. After discovering the blown engine, I was trying to figure out where to go with the project. My initial thought was that I would source used engine components online and rebuild the engine using performance parts where it made sense. After disassembling the engine, I found it to be beyond the point of repair. The crankshaft was deeply scored, the case was broken, and there was tons of cylinder wall damage. What to do now? There were a few possibilities that I took into consideration. The first is, I could find a replacement engine out of a salvage bike online and do a direct engine swap. The second option would be to find the correct year ZX9 engine online and upgrade the bike from a 750 to a 900. The bike is nearly identical in external dimension, and the swap is well documented. A couple of more exotic options were to go the ZX10 conversion. There's a guy from Europe that makes a kit that allows the ZX10 engine to be bolted into the ZX7R frame. He also has a kit that will allow the wheels and fork tube assemblies to be adapted to the ZX7. After consideration, I figured that the more exotic options would end up in a never-ending or multi-year project, and didn't want that. I decided to procure a salvage engine off of eBay and do a direct replacement engine swap and hope the engine that I bought was mechanically sound. Reassembly began with a trip to the local car wash where all the big pieces were pressure washed. I got out the polishing compound and went to work on the frame and swing arm. The previous owner did a great job with the original polish, and after a couple of hours this frame had been brought back to life. I don't have any pictures of the fork rebuild, but the forks were totally rebuilt with new bushings, seals, and an appropriate amount of fork fluid. The springs seemed a little weak, but I decided I would leave them installed for now. I polished the forks, and they cleaned up every bit as good as the frame. Next came the swing arm and the subframe. Before I knew it, I had what started to look like a motorcycle in my shop. For no particular reason, the hand grips, controls, and instrument cluster came next. I cleaned up the eBay engine, and soon it found its way home inside the frame. Not having any of the wheels on made this job a lot easier as I brought the frame to the engine for alignment and mounting. I did some research on the OEM color codes for this bike. I found that paint was still available. I wanted to powder coat the wheels instead of paint them, so I went on a quest to match the jet ski violet with an appropriate matching powder. I came up with prismatic Sinbad purple. It's a dead match for the color on the OEM fairing. The wheels looked fantastic when I got them back from the powder coater. I pressed new bearings in, and before long the bike was on its wheels. I also had the powder coater do the rotor hubs in gloss black, which is a nice contrast on the front wheel assembly. The radiator came on next, and I started routing the new silicone coolant lines. The bike was really shaping up at this point. I had the exhaust header blasted and coated in flat black ceramic. The aluminum muffler can was polished and repacked. I fabricated a new exhaust hanger out of a strip of aluminum from the hardware store, as the original pipe mount was unavailable. I'm really happy with the way the exhaust on this bike turned out. Now on to one of the most elusive parts of this build. The carburetors. When I took the carburetors off the bike, the linkage was completely stuck from years of sitting. I took plenty of pictures for documentation and headed off to the parts washer. I completely disassembled the carburetors, keeping each set of parts separate in its own container. I soaked the carbs for about an hour before I went to work on them with the brush and continued disassembly. I initially wanted to keep the carburetors on the common rail to avoid having to do a lot of synchronization after the job was done. I soon discovered that that wasn't going to be an option. Each carburetor was going to be its own independent challenge, so off the rail they came. Initial cleaning with the parts washer revealed a ton of corrosion varnish and gunk. After complete disassembly, I put the components in an ultrasonic cleaner. I cranked up the heat and let it buzz for about 20 minutes. I pulled the carbs out, gave them the once-over, and then back in the bath they went. The ultrasonic cleaning results were fantastic. When complete, they looked like jewelry. I chose an all-balls rebuild kit that provided all of the O-rings to support the fuel rail, needle, and seat for the float needle, new high and low-speed jets, and air screws. The air screws were a little bit different design than the OEM, and I decided to clean the old ones the best I could and reinstall them at the previously adjusted position of 2 turns out. I also set the float level in accordance with the maintenance manual. When I was done, everything looked and felt great. The linkage was free, and the butterflies operated without any binding. I mechanically set the transfer linkage as close as I could to the master carburetor on the bank. I was happy with the results and had high hopes for their operation when they got installed back in the bike. The next big decision I had to make was what to do with the bodywork. The original fairing was still structurally sound, but had scratches and wear marks from previous use. I did some research on the aftermarket fairing kits that are available online. I decided to roll the bones and try a set from China that was advertised on eBay. The vendor was quick to answer all my questions about the quality of the fairings and the expected fit and finish. A month and a half later, a giant box from China showed up. Initially, the fairings looked fantastic. They were lighter weight and not nearly as rigid as the OEM, but the color didn't look bad, and the finish was really nice. Issues popped up when I tried to install the headlight assembly into the front fairing. It didn't fit very good, and the mounting brackets that were molded into the back of the fiberglass didn't line up and looked weak compared to the original Kawasaki product. After several hours of trying to get things squared away, I decided to abandon the China fairing project until I got the bike up and running, at which time I would evaluate if I wanted to use it or go through the process of refurbishing and painting the OEM fairings. The last items that needed consideration in the restoration of this bike were the gas tank and the brakes. The tank had rust from years of sitting and needed a good cleaning. I've done this before with varying levels of success. On this tank, I tried both Evapo Rust and acid-based toilet bowl cleaner. Both products seemed to work good, with the acid being a little bit more aggressive. I hesitated to go as far as muriatic acid for fear of creating issues with the paint on the tank. The petcock was also frozen in time, so I installed a replacement unit procured from Amazon. I was able to exercise the front brake calipers throughout the entire range of motion, flush and bleed the system, and installed new brake pads. The front stopping power was now as good as new. I was not so fortunate on the rear set. The caliper piston was stuck in the bore. The banjo fitting on the rear caliper is conveniently aligned with the center of the piston. This allowed me easy access to press the piston out. I cleaned up the bore, installed an all-balls rebuild kit, new pads, and fresh fluid. Brake job complete. With all the bits and pieces assembled, it was time to start the engine for the first time. I went through the prime sequence, and when the bowls were full, I opened the choke and hit the starter. The engine sputtered to life. It was running a bit rough, but I expected that. I let the engine warm up with the idle set around 2,000 RPMs. The bike came up to temperature, and the fan cycled on and off appropriately. I then turned the idle down to around 1,500. At this RPM, there was a very concerning sound coming from the engine. I couldn't tell whether the eBay engine had a bad main bearing or maybe the timing chain was out of adjustment. I verified that the auto tensioner on the timing chain was set properly, but the sound remained. I hooked up my vacuum synchronizer, and I immediately saw what was wrong. When I eyeballed the butterflies when setting up the carburetors on the bench, I guess I had one a little off. The sound I was hearing was that cylinder dropping out and shaking the engine like a diesel. About 10 minutes of adjusting, and I had the engine running smooth. I gave it the once-over looking for any kind of coolant or oil leaks or anything that might be obviously wrong. Everything looked great, so it was time for a shakedown ride. The first ride was very successful. I put a couple of 100 miles on the bike over the next week to make sure it was going to be reliable. I had an issue with the fuel pump and some more tuning on the carburetors before I got them right. Besides these items, the bike handled well and ran really strong. The riding experience can only be categorized as extreme. The homologated track bike DNA is present in every bit of the ride. The seating posture is aggressive. The inline-4 engine through the 4 into 1 pipe absolutely screams at high RPMs. It's definitely a wind-it-up-and-watch-it-go kind of an engine. The faster it spins, the better it runs. When riding, casual observation of the people and vehicles around you reveals their deep disdain for what you represent, conjuring vivid images of felonious delinquency. This entire ZX7R project culminated in a most excellent way. My son turned 25 this year. He is also an avid motorcycle enthusiast who rides a Daytona 675. For his birthday, I arranged a couple of days at the California Superbike School at the track in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was a fantastic experience that I could share with him. We both elevated our riding skills immensely in a very short amount of time. The ZX7R did leave a few people scratching their heads. One guy asked if I picked it up at the Antique Roadshow. It was the only carbureted bike in the field both days. It ran great, I had fun, my skills improved, and I had an amazing experience with my son. One thing is for sure, I can guarantee that no one else in the field took a free basket case bike with a blown engine, rebuilt every nut and bolt, tuned it, and rode to their personal potential. This project was worth every bit of what I put into it. I can't wait until the next one. My name is Fitz, and I'm a motoholic.